HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Game of Thrones Psychology. The mind is dark and full of terrors. Edited by Travis Langley. Read by Liam Gerrard and Esther Wane. Forward. Do you still believe in happy endings? Kyle Maddock. I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones all the time. I endlessly podcast about them and host a YouTube show on the topic, but this audiobook is a different sort of beast. I'm used to scratching the surface of the story with discussions about favourite scenes and whether you think Jon Snow is really dead. This audiobook delves much deeper than that. Why are we so fascinated by this seemingly horrific tale where the good guys never seem to win? What keeps us coming back week after week? Game of Thrones was never supposed to be made. George R.R. Martin wrote A Song of Ice and Fire to be unfilmable. He was sick and tired of the limitations and difficulties of writing for television. Yet, for a show that was never supposed to be, it sure is successful. In fact, it's the most successful HBO show ever made, trumping the ratings of the former champ, The Sopranos. So how does a show that was too big to be filmed do so well? There are too many characters, too many locations, too many plots. These hurdles were part of the reason I enjoyed it. In our high-speed, information-overloaded lives, we are confronted with countless stories that are often boiled down to a headline. Content providers seem to be afraid that we don't have the patience to enjoy something complex. It is an elaborate story spanning continents, populated by morally grey characters that speak multiple languages, live in varied societies, and worship numerous faiths. I love this. I feel challenged by it, and rewarded when the pieces fit together. There is a sense of satisfaction when you watch these characters spin their tangled webs, and you can figure out their endgame. And when you can't, there's a delight in the reveal. Too many shows shy away from this sort of complexity. They shouldn't be afraid of it. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a need for some popcorn shows that make us smile and laugh and cheer and forget the woes of our day. Game of Thrones is not that show, and that is a good thing. Things seemed a lot simpler back when the story began. For one, everyone was together. The Starks were still a family welcoming the king and queen and their entourage into their home. On television, almost every main character was on screen at the same time. The first episode wasn't jumping from location to location in a dizzying frenzy, trying to touch on every story. It was set up in such a way that nothing seemed abnormal. A typical start to a fantasy adventure. The reluctant hero is forced into a position to help the king after a mysterious murder. It isn't until the final scene of the pilot that we, the viewers, realize this may not be typical fantasy fare. Bran climbs a tower, witnesses something he should not have seen, and is thrown from the tower to silence him. Is that the scene that made you take notice? Perhaps it was the next episode, when Ned must kill his daughter's direwolf. When Ned later dies, any lingering thoughts I had of this being just another story were gone. The hero had lost. Why did this intrigue me? Why is this the moment that so many people point to when discussing the series? The mind really is dark and full of terrors, if we're mesmerized by the death of the hero. Or is it more that in a sea of happily ever afters, we're fascinated when that literary convention is turned on its head? From there, the story, like the Stark family, scatters. We follow so many characters with so many various adventures. We bump into every walk of life that Westeros has to offer, from the commoners to the nobles, from the nice to the sadistic, and everything in between. And on these adventures, through the eyes of these characters, we see situations and circumstances that most of us have never faced and hopefully never will. We experience and relate to each one in a unique way that reflects our own beliefs and personal history. Game of Thrones is not painted in black and white. There are few characters that are truly good or evil. It is that grey that draws us into their stories. It is that moral ambiguity that lets us relate and connect to the choices and actions they make. If it was more clear-cut, we could say, that's bad or that's good, and move on. But it's not. The hard choices these characters make force viewers to discuss and debate what is right and what is wrong. That's a big reason I find these characters so intriguing. I root for the redemption of Theon Greyjoy, while everyone around me hopes for his death. Why do we have such varying opinions? The scenes I watch on my TV aren't any different from those on yours. We follow fan favourite Arya Stark as she's dragged away from her father's death. She's thrust onto the road and into a kill-or-be-killed world. It's easy to see why Arya is so beloved. She doesn't play the victim. Much like Brienne, these women stand up for themselves. They fight back. They're badass. They react in a way that many of us hope we would in those circumstances. But they're also well-rounded characters. You can see the wounds they carry. You can see the trials they've been through, and how they don't let those trials dictate their actions. They're a joy to watch. There are so many characters in Game of Thrones that we can relate to. Tyrion, the outcast who's forced to use brains over brawn. Daenerys, the orphan who's trying to find her way in the world while longing for home. And Jon Snow, the bastard who wants to make his father proud. But amid all these characters, there are some that are a lot harder for most of us to understand. Joffrey Baratheon, Gregor Clegane, and Ramsay Snow delight in the pain and suffering of others. Why is this? What makes them do what they do? Why do we watch? Can we separate ourselves from these sadistic scenes because it's a fictional story? It's certainly hard to watch. In fact, there are people who have stopped watching because of these characters. There are others who are fascinated by it. The mind is complex, and for everyone out there that's filled with sunshine and rainbows, there is another full of darker things. In the end, we enjoy this story because it reflects our own human nature. It reflects our own struggle to survive in a difficult world. It is full of hope and fear, love and hate, good and evil. It is full of choices. We relate to these characters because we can see bits of ourselves in them and the decisions they make. We can, to one degree or another, understand what they are going through, and because of this, we care what happens to them. Game of Thrones, arguably more than any other show on television, puts its characters through the most intense, arduous, and difficult challenges. After 5 seasons, they are still being beaten down. Yet we continue to watch. Are we gluttons for punishment and heartache? Or do we truly believe in happy endings? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Are we hoping that through it all, the good guys will win? Introduction. But insight burns them all away. Travis Langley. The night is dark and full of terrors, but the fire burns them all away. Melisandre, the Red Woman. In the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. Author Annie Dillard. What are they thinking? Why would they do that? Can't they see the harm they're inflicting on themselves? We ask these questions all the time. Asking them about fictional characters differs a bit from asking them about living beings, because we know the characters differently than we know those around us. Better in some ways, more poorly in others. While we can read descriptions of Sansa's dreams and Cersei's frustrations, or watch scenes that depict how Tyrion acts when he is all alone, we can only guess as to the thoughts, feelings, intentions, beliefs, and private actions of our relatives, friends, acquaintances, and strangers all around, or take their word for it when they describe those things themselves. We can interact with people on this planet, though. We can ask them questions and provoke reactions that we will never elicit from characters in a fantasy world, but that can be tricky, even dangerous. Contemplating character motivation feels safer. Sometimes it lets us look more objectively than when we consider the motivation of real people. It can also let us delve into darker subjects than we might otherwise dare to. Paradoxical as it might sound, fiction can help us see real people more accurately. Asking such questions about the person whose reality we each know best, though, can sometimes be hardest of all. People throughout recorded history have found it easier to scrutinize someone else's shortcomings than to face their own. Therapists from numerous schools of psychology have based their methods on the assumption that people need to understand themselves and their lives better in order to cope and grow. Insight-oriented approaches involve a lot of conversations and may take a great deal of time. Often called insight therapy or talk therapy, Freudian psychoanalysis can go on for years as the psychoanalyst guides the client into discovering and understanding unconscious conflicts and motivations. Client-centered therapy, now more popularly known as person-centered therapy, lets the client guide the process while still pursuing a more realistic understanding of self and surroundings. The more philosophically oriented existential therapy and Gestalt psychology work toward objective understanding of one's existence and place in the world. Rational emotive behavior therapy focuses on getting the client to think and feel more rationally. The list goes on and on. No therapeutic method is suitable for every mental need, any more than aspirin should be dispensed for every physical malady. One criticism of insight-oriented approaches is that they work best for clients who already have the capacity for insight and the motivation to gain more. Not everyone wants to look into the mirror. People with personality disorders, whose personalities include enduring traits that broadly interfere with functioning in many areas of life, frequently lack both the motivation to change who they are and the insight that might help them to do so. No matter how much Circe might benefit by seeing that her own petty motivations and her failures to foresee repercussions cause her plans to backfire and hurt her, as when she empowers a church that will later torment her, she does not want to see herself in that mirror. That does not mean she cannot see, but to do so would require change she might be unwilling to make. She is Circe. She revels in being who she is. Just as her short-sightedness in certain areas endangers the throne, players in the Game of Thrones endanger their whole world by playing the game when a greater menace grows, a menace that most don't know about, while some, who see evidence of the world's danger, simply refuse to believe. Because they do not want an army of the undead to destroy them all, they choose to live in a personal reality where no such army exists. Facing dangers can be hard. Acknowledging truths can be difficult, even depressing. Blinding ourselves to hard truths can provide short-term relief, but at the risk of escalating long-term jeopardy. We keep reading George R.R. Martin's stories and watching their on-screen depictions because we hope and believe enough of the characters will gain enough insight into their own natures and enough understanding of what really matters in time to save their world. Letting ourselves hope and believe in them helps us practice hoping and believing in ourselves and in the future before us all. We've done this all our lives, from when we learned during childhood by mimicking adults by playing. Our fictions gave us insight. Sometimes, to ready ourselves for life, we first must play a game. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Military strategist Sun Tzu, 6th century BCE. A Song of Ice and Fire. Book series by author George R.R. Martin. A Game of Thrones, 1996. A Clash of Kings, 1998, Voyager, 1999, Bantam Spectra. A Storm of Swords, 2000. A Feast for Crows, 2005. A Dance with Dragons, 2011. The Winds of Winter, A Dream of Spring. Original publisher, Voyager Books, London, UK. North American publisher, Bantam Spectra, New York, USA. Game of Thrones, television credits. Series creators, showrunners, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Executive producers, Frank Dolger, Bernadette Caulfield, Carolyn Strauss, George R.R. Martin, and the showrunners. Original network, HBO. Production companies, HBO Entertainment, Television 360, Startling Television, Big Head Little Head. Part 1. Feasts. Many hungers drive the living. Appetites for food, sex, comfort, warmth. Why do some indulge to excess, while others scrape to survive? Why does one person with needs met crave even more while another can think in the long term about more complicated priorities? Why does anyone revel at the party when dangers are at hand? Who satisfies appetites in ways that also help others, and who gets satisfaction by hurting others instead? Why? It's the most basic question at the heart of psychology. A question we ask about both others and ourselves. Why do we do the things we do? What motivates anyone's behavior, whether selfish, selfless, or even self-destructive? Chapter 1. Need and Greed. Wherein lies the motive? Travis Langley. Prey to pride, ambition, lust, love, anger, jealousy, greed for gold, hunger for power, and all the other failings that afflicted lesser mortals. Sir Barristan Selmy, regarding the Kingsguard. Greed is a bottomless pit, which exhausts the person in an endless effort to satisfy the need without ever reaching satisfaction. Psychologist Erich Fromm. Need and greed motivate many people in the actions they take, with their most self-serving deeds arguably more so. Physical, emotional, and social insufficiencies prompt people to try to fill gaps in what they have. Some who feel satisfied do not grapple for more. Others, though, feel there is never enough and keep pursuing, keep amassing, keep trying to fill holes inside themselves that never can be filled. Why? What makes a person value one deficit or desire above another? Many motives may drive any action, and many causes can create each motive. Hierarchies. When her future daughter-in-law Marjorie plans to give a grand feast's leftovers to the poor, why does Cersei undermine her by ordering that the food go to the dogs instead? What purpose does that serve? When we ask why Cersei goes behind Marjorie's back, we are asking about her motivation, the processes that fuel her behavior and give it direction. We wonder what drives both her overt behavior, the actions we can observe, and her covert behavior, all the things she does that we cannot witness directly, mental activities such as her thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs. Why did she give that order, and where did the thought or feeling that she should give it come from? Blood before... Motives are hierarchical, meaning that some are strong enough to rank persistently at the top of a hierarchy and take priority over others. Self-preservation is a powerful motive that is necessary to push each person to survive, as Martin's characters demonstrate in so many chapters in the books and on every episode on television. Some people value self-preservation above all other motives. Many do not. Motivation to protect loved ones, for example, is frequently even more powerful. Although Ned Stark values honour and truth above his own life, he relinquishes both, and consequently his life, for a chance to keep his family safe. Theorists offer many suggestions about why people would ever risk their own well-being to help anyone, especially blood kin. Ethologists, sociobiologists, and others who take an evolutionary perspective explain much behaviour, particularly selfishness and altruism, in terms of how every action affects the odds that the performer's genes will be passed down through future generations. Behaviorists explain altruism in terms of gaining other rewards or discounting the personal risks. Scientists and philosophers propose many additional reasons, some of which can be difficult to put to any test. Most likely, many factors figure in. Not everyone puts family first, though. Even Stannis Baratheon, who cherishes his daughters so much that he searches the world at great effort and cost until he acquires the cure for her otherwise fatal disease, places his avarice for power above her. When he thinks the sacrifice to a fire god will grant him victory and eventually the Iron Throne, he burns his only child alive. In his motive hierarchy, his crown outranks his heir. Climbing the Pyramid. Psychologist Abraham Maslow proposed that our inborn needs naturally prioritize themselves, because people must satisfy the most basic biological needs at least partially before they feel the urge to fulfill more psychologically oriented needs. Maslow saw the most primitive needs, the primal urges, as being inherently strong enough to overpower more advanced needs if they are not met. Tyrion can say, "The mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone," more easily than a starving street orphan might. When given a choice between books and bread, the orphan will go for the bread. When teetering on the edge of death, with his nose bleeding and his vision blurring from the poison that courses through his veins, sellsword Bronn stops acting too proud to compliment the woman who holds the antidote. The Stark children, who grow up with supplies, shelter, support, and family love aplenty, find it easier than many might to work on self-esteem needs. Despite his theory's popularity, evidence regarding its universality is mixed. Maslow's research was neither rigorous nor methodically controlled. By ordinary standards of laboratory research, Maslow said of his own work, this was simply not research at all. He considered his studies of human nature to be exploratory pilot studies that would be confirmed by others, although a number of studies indicate that people tend to progress through these needs in the order Maslow posited, and that those whose needs are met feel greater satisfaction in life. A tendency is not a one-size-fits-all pattern. Not everyone fits Maslow's mold. People can prioritize motives in ways consistent with his views, but the exceptions may pose a problem for the theory. There are, for example, some starving people who nevertheless develop healthy self-esteem. Also, research does not consistently confirm his expectation that need deprivation will produce pathology. Maslow's hierarchy of needs remains a well-known model for contemplating the ways people prioritize their motives, though. Something about it resonates with how people understand motivation. What, then, do we really know about its different levels? The game file, features that appear at the end of every section in this audiobook, explore each level of that pyramid in greater depth. Where, when, why? Where do those motives come from, and when do they come out? Understanding why people prioritize them as they do may require greater understanding of the motives themselves. Intrinsic versus extrinsic. When Robb Stark has sex with Talisa Mygear, he does so because that is what he wants to do, not for any ulterior purpose. The first time Daenerys has sex with her new husband, though, she submits for the same reason she marries him, to support a military alliance. Robb's motivation is intrinsic, in that he beds Talisa because it is what he wants to do. whereas Daenerys's motivation on television is extrinsic, in that she initially accepts her expected duty only to serve some other goal. Without knowing terms such as intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, people wonder about them all the time. Shae appears to stay with Tyrion out of progressively growing attachment, rejecting a bag of diamonds rather than leave him. Ultimately, though, Shae betrays Tyrion, and he soon discovers she has been working for his father. An extrinsically motivated betrayal, if it is motivated by payment from his father, but intrinsically motivated if it is driven by feelings of spite, or maybe it is both. People with trusting natures more readily accept others at face value, and assume, for example, that those who do kind things are acting out of intrinsic kindness. Distrustful individuals, in contrast, suspect that people perform even the kindest acts for self-serving reasons, to get something from others. Either view can be wrong or right in different circumstances. Extrinsic motives can drown the intrinsic. A person who likes to paint for its own sake may start to perceive it as a chore after people begin paying that individual to paint. Actor Jack Gleeson, who played Joffrey Baratheon, lost some of his interest in acting for just such a reason. "I just stopped enjoying it as much as I used to," he said. "It was always something I did for recreation with my friends, or in the summer for some fun. I enjoyed it. When you make a living from something, it changes your relationship with it." When external rewards provide excessive justification for performing a task, enjoyment, or drive to perform the task may diminish, a phenomenon known as the over-justification effect. The power of here and now. Politicians bicker over how to fight existing crime or terrorism and pass fewer laws aimed at improving the conditions that cultivate them in the first place. Long-term preparation, no matter how severely it is needed, does not readily produce victories about which lawmakers may boast before the next election. The more complicated or abstract an issue is, and the wider its array of causal factors may be, the more those who need to solve a problem will have trouble rallying support for their efforts. An army of the undead White Walkers may not be as complicated as worldwide crime or terrorism, but to those who have not yet witnessed it, it is not a visible threat. Neither vivid nor immediate, it is not present in the here and now. Even members of the Night's Watch, those who guard the wall that keeps the undead from invading the living, bicker and fight their own in-house squabbles instead of preparing. Information presented to us vividly makes a stronger impact, the vividness effect. Even those inclined to believe that Jon Snow and Sam Tarly saw White Walkers feel less motivated than they do to prepare. Because their fellow brothers and in-house squabbles are right there in front of them, they will attack one another immediately, while the danger not yet in view keeps growing. Urgency adds energy to a motive. The immediate need will be more powerful than the long-term need. This is another reason rangers fight wildlings, or even one another, wasting time, energy, and resources that could save the world. Dangers and desires at hand command attention and can shove long-term needs to the back burner. This may be one reason Maslow's hierarchy of needs makes sense to many people. The needs at the bottom of the pyramid, for example hunger, lust, feel immediate, whereas the needs at the next level up, for example shelter, supplies, are more long-term in nature. Fulfilling an immediate purpose rewards the performer sooner. Both reward, reinforcement, and punishment are more effective at changing behavior when they are delivered right away, although humans are better at learning from delays than are non-human animals. Learning impulse control is an important part of growing up and is considered a sign of maturity. Youngsters experienced at postponing gratification tend to become more socially competent, unlike the pampered Robin Arryn, who never learns patience, self-control, or how to get along with others. Big picture. The title, Game of Thrones, stresses that the conflict over who should rule whom.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?